of good cheer, Paul. For as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome.
Acts 23, verse 1. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law? Yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck? Those who stood by said, Would you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply. We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near. Now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you. The tribune took him by the hand, and going aside asked him privately, What is it that you have to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for your consent. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, Tell no one that you have informed me of these things. Then he called 2 of the centurions and said, Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, to his excellency the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them, when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And on the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guided in Herod's praetorium. Acts 23 plunges us deeper into the dramatic unfolding of Paul's journey through trials and opposition. Having just endured a chaotic confrontation with the Sanhedrin Council, Paul now finds himself navigating the sharp tensions between religious hostility and Roman legal protection. In this chapter, in Acts chapter 23, we witness God's providence at work through unlikely means like a Roman commander and a young nephew, preserving Paul for the mission ahead. As the apostle stands firm before councils and conspirators and governors, Acts 23 challenges us to reflect on the courage it takes to stand for truth in hostile environments. The study invites us to consider how we, like Paul, can remain faithful witnesses even when surrounded by plots, pressures, and politics. In verse 1, Paul begins by declaring that he has lived his life before God in all good conscience. Now, what does Paul mean by this? We know that Paul did not mean that he lived a sinless life before God. Paul proclaimed that he was the foremost of all sinners in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 15. Rather, Paul is speaking about living a life of integrity. Paul has devoted his life to be pleasing to God. Paul has devoted himself to doing what is right before God and all people. He has not been perfect by any means, but that has been his life effort. Now, after saying these words, the high priest orders for those standing near Paul to hit him in the mouth. Paul has barely said anything, and immediately the high priest has Paul smacked in the mouth, which was completely against the law. And that's exactly what Paul proclaims in verse 3. God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. You are judging me according to the law while you are sitting there breaking the law. This is why Paul calls the high priest a whitewashed wall. The picture is that of a wall that is full of filth and mold and grime, but you just cover it all over with paint to make it look like you are pure and good. Paul does not retaliate. Instead, he declares that God is going to judge the high priest for breaking the law. Now, those standing by challenge Paul. Would you revile God's high priest? Now, listen to Paul's answer here. He says, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest. Now, why is this a problem? This is a problem because the law in Exodus 22 verse 28 taught that you were not to speak evil of a ruler of your people. Now think about this for a moment. Was the high priest wrong? Yes. Was the high priest breaking the law? Yes. Was the high priest breaking God's law? Yep. Was the high priest a whitewashed wall? Oh yeah. Is the high priest carrying out injustice? Yes. But none of that nullifies the law. And Paul acknowledges that he should not have said it and would not have said it if he knew that this man was a ruler. Folks, I'm shocked at how Christians have behaved and spoken about leaders and those in authority over the last few years. It is terrible that Christians engage in this kind of talk. We do not speak against those who are in authority. The Apostle Paul himself tells us why when he wrote to the Christians in Rome. Remember when we studied Romans? In Romans 13 and verse 1, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Now listen to what Paul says next. Paul says in verse 2 of Romans 13 that whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Wicked rulers do not give us the freedom to speak evil about them. Further, we do not see Jesus or Paul resisting human authorities. Our words and actions must still reflect Jesus, even if the rulers and authorities are acting contrary to God and his law. This is what Paul is exemplifying here. If you do not like the president that we currently have, or the last president, or the president before that, or the one before that. Don't speak against authorities because they have been instituted by God. It does not matter if the leader is wrong. We are not justified to revile a leader because he is there, because God has put him there. Living in good conscience before God and others means that we do not engage in this kind of behavior. Now, back to our text. In verse 11, Paul proclaims that the reason he is on trial is because of his belief in the resurrection of the dead. This is true. Paul was proclaiming Jesus as the Christ because he arose from the dead and spoke directly to Paul and told him to proclaim what he witnessed to the Gentiles. Proclaiming this statement causes an uproar among the Jewish leaders because the Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection of the body while the Pharisees did. When the dispute turned violent, the soldiers had to remove Paul by force from their hands and bring him back to the barracks, verse 10. But look at verse 11. The Lord comes to Paul and tells him to have courage because Paul is going to do God's will by giving his testimony in Rome, just as he had in Jerusalem. Now think about this, because here's what I would be wondering. Lord, if you want me to take this message to Rome, why did you have me come to Jerusalem, where you repeatedly told me this kind of violent uprising was going to happen? Why not just send me there via Corinth? In Acts 17, I was almost of the way there. Now, this is a hard truth to grasp, but it's important, I think, that we understand this. God can accomplish his plan through the suffering, hardships, violence, and imprisonment that may have happened to us. Living in good conscience before God means that we are ready to take the hard path that he leads us on. Remember what the Lord through Moses told Israel about why God takes us through the hard path? In Deuteronomy 8 and verse 2, you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. God is going to take us through the greatest pains in life to humble us and to test our hearts. God is going to take us down some really hard roads because God is accomplishing his plan through our pain. God is testing us. God is being glorified through us. We must be ready to be used as God's instruments in this work. Paul is going through a very hard way, but it was God's will. It was God's plan. Paul is yielding himself to God's will. So Paul is going through hardships. A conspiracy is revealed where more than 40 Jews took an oath that they would not eat or drink until they had killed Paul. So they want the Romans to bring him back out, and they will kill him on his way to the council. But God's hand is at work. Paul's nephew hears about this conspiracy, tells Paul, and that news is taken to the Roman commander. So rather than keeping Paul in Jerusalem, they send him to Caesarea for his own protection. Now, what's very interesting here at the end of this chapter is we see the remarkable providence of God at work, even through the machinery of the Roman Empire. Even the letter that the Roman commander wrote, which, by the way, he makes himself look like the hero in the story, but he does take swift and extraordinary measures to protect him. He assigns nearly 500 soldiers to escort a single prisoner under cover of night to Caesarea. The heavy military presence underscores both the danger Paul faced and the value Romans placed on protecting its citizens. I think the letter also shows us that Paul is an innocent man, entangled in theological disputes, not criminal behavior, which highlights the true nature of the conflict, that it was religious, not legal. Despite the unjust hostility from the Jews, though, Paul was preserved, moved closer to Rome, and now stands ready to defend the gospel before Roman governors. This passage powerfully illustrates how God uses even pagan authorities and complex political systems to accomplish his purposes, ensuring Paul continues his mission to bear witness before kings. Well, that concludes Acts chapter 23. Next time, Acts chapter 24. Thank you so much. Have a great and wonderful day.
Before the throne of